Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Marnese Live Talkshow. I'm your host, Marnese Jackson, and this is a show where we talk about life issues. And so we're back. And so today we have a wonderful panel of guests that's going to talk about Black liberation and what it looks like. And so we're going to invite Baba Daryl Jordan, Carrie Fulton, Natasha Thomas, David Walton, Alea, Harvey Quinn, and Michael Gibson into the Marnese Live Talk Show. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Marnese Live Talk Show.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, what's up?
And I would like to say happy birthday to Miss Alea.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I hope we played the appropriate song for you. And so I'm gonna go ahead and get this conversation started because we want to make sure that you get involved with your safety, social distancing, birthday festivities. Okay, so we're gonna try to make sure we get you out on time and everybody else out on time. So tonight, we're gonna go ahead and get into the conversation, but thanks so much for being here. And so if we can all go around and let's get this conversation going. So if you can introduce yourselves, tell us where you're at. If you want to disclose your gender pronouns or what do you identify as, meaning Black, African American, you can also tell us, the audience members, that. But then also I would like for you to answer, what does Black liberation looks like? Because this is Black August and we are commemorating our revolutionary Black Panther author George Jackson. And also there's a lot of revolutionary things that happen in the month of August. And so we can go ahead and kick it off. Do the birthday lady want to start first? Or
Sure. My name is Alea Harvey Quinn, she, her, hers. I'm the executive director for Force Detroit, and Force Detroit convenes the Live Free Detroit Coalition. We work on issues of criminal justice reform, anti-criminalization, and safety. And we work with some of Detroit's grittiest activists to create innovative advocacy reform points that will benefit people most impacted by violence, crime, poverty in Detroit.
all right, thank you so much. And so what does Black liberation look like to you?
Honestly, I think holistically, we don't fully know what it'll look like. The closest that we have to conceptualize and what it could look like would be the plan that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad laid out, where we had a number of states, sovereign states to our people, and we're free to cultivate our own land, build our own government, and exist harmoniously as a people unto ourselves.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I'm going to pass it to Natasha. You look like you're ready to get into the conversation.
I'll go next. Yes, I am. So I'm Natasha Thomas Jackson. I go by she, her, her pronouns. And I've worked with a number of organizations, but the two that I will mention is that I'm with the Michigan Organization for Adolescent Sexual Health, where I work with young people who are around sexual justice, gender justice. I do a lot of work with young people who identify as LGBTQ+, and young people who are living with HIV. So just a lot around like sexual health and justice. And then I'm also starting a project called the Nadoma Center for Social Justice and Spiritual Transformation. And it is designed to kind of deal with these issues, these kind of questions about what liberation looks like on a spiritual level, as well as on a social and political level. In terms of what Black liberation looks like, I think Alea said it. It's one of those kind of things where it's still a work in progress in terms of us defining it. I will say that I agree that it should be holistic. I also think it should really be intersectional in the sense that it recognizes that, yes, we are Black people, but we hold so many identities, whether we're, man, woman, or non-gender conforming, whether we are straight, gay, whatever. And so whatever that liberation movement looks like for me, it has to include all of those identities and make space for all of those people. And to say, when you come into this space, we're going to recognize that you're Black, but we're going to recognize and appreciate and value all those other identities. You don't have to leave any part of yourself at the door, at least for any movement that I'm a part of, right? You shouldn't have to leave any part of who you are at the door. And so I agree. I think it should be intersectional, holistic, and just take into account that we have many different expressions, and our movement needs to make room for all of those.
Okay, great. And Natasha, I have a follow-up question. After we, I'm gonna go ahead and go to Baba Daryl to get into this conversation. And welcome, Michael. Glad to see you up in here again. Baba Daryl, can you
Yes, you ready? All right.
all right.
Daryl Jordan. I'm with the East Michigan Environmental Action Council. It's an environmental organization working on water, air, all those environmental racist issues that especially happen in a 90% Black city that grew up on all kinds of factory and industrial stuff. And we do education, starting with young kids, and we do organizing around environmental issues, which mean that we intersect with every other issue out here if we are about surviving. And for me, what does Black liberation look like? I tried to write down my thoughts real quick. And so it means that Black people get back to loving and respecting each other, that we are self-governing, and that we are self-sustaining economically, socially, emotionally, environmentally, communally. Because once Black people began to realize that we the same people and we have responsibilities to each other, I think we'd be in a different place, because right now we're probably more divided than I've ever seen in my lifetime anyway.
All right. Thank you so much, Baba. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to Brother David Kalanji Walton, fellow Eastern Michigan alum. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome, my pleasure. My name is Dr. David Walton. Most people know me as Kalanji or Brother Kalanji. I am the inaugural director of Black Studies at Western Carolina University and assistant professor of history. I'm from Romulus, Michigan, the first Black community in the state of Michigan, according to census data. Not where the first Black person was in Michigan, but where the first Black community was. I attended Eastern Michigan University and earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and then went on to Michigan State University and earned 2 doctoral degrees. For me, Black liberation, what does Black liberation look like? And much of that answer is it centers around liberate from what? Free ourselves from what? So I just have a couple characteristics of what Black liberation looks like for me, or would look like for me. And that is self-determination. And what do I mean by self-determination? We need to be employers and producers. Employers and producers. We are consumers. We are the #1 consumer in the world. We need to be producers and employers of our own. Going back, I used to be in the Nation of Islam, so I understand my sister, going back to what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad established within the Nation of Islam, employers and producers. We have to control the politics in our community. In Detroit, for example, we don't control the politics in our own community. We need to control the economics in our community. If we can't be liberated, we can't be free if we don't control the economics. We need to control the institutions in our communities. We need to be self-sufficient. We cannot rely on the federal government or the state government. And we have to decolonize our minds and our cultures, plural, because Black people are diverse, despite what Vice President Joe Biden said. Black people are diverse cultures. I am now at Western Carolina in the Appalachian Mountains. Afro-Latin culture is different than the Bayou culture in New Orleans, which is different than the culture in Detroit, which is different than the culture in San Francisco, and et cetera, et cetera. So that would be my broad bullet points on what Black liberation needs to look like and should look like.
Thank you, Brother Walton. All right, welcome back, Brother Michael. So tell us who you are, any gender pronouns that you like to disclose, what you identify as Black, African American, more, tell us. And what does Black liberation look like to you?
One, thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm late. I literally was just on another one of these right before this one. This has been a very Zoom heavy day. I'm L. Michael Gibson. I am a writer, an educator, a cultural critic. I'm the founder of 3 institutions, including most recently Black Bear Brotherhood for Black, gay, same gender loving, bisexual men of size, gender nonconforming men of size. I'm also the founder of a youth center in Cleveland, Ohio, the first in the state of Ohio for Black LGBTQ youth of color. Founder of the Alphabet Film Festival in Chicago, and my own business. And I think a lot of people already echoed or said what I think of when I think of Black liberation. You know, certainly self-determination, certainly having some sovereignty. I really like what the sister had to say as I was coming in about it looks like no one having to be on their knees in order for somebody else to feel tall. So like if you're a cis heterosexual man, you don't need your sister on knees to be submissive to you in order for you to feel tall. You don't need your gay or bisexual or transgender folks to be something less or marginal in order for you to feel good about yourself and our community. I think that it's a freedom that in which we all get to enjoy, those of us who are melanated. So yeah, I think that, you know, cooperative economics, we've seen some of that. I mean, I heard the brother say that he felt like we were the most divisive he's ever seen us. You know, and I'm only 45. I'm not sure how old the brother is who said that. But I actually have a very different opinion about that. I feel like I'm seeing young people out in the streets fighting for our liberation in a way that they weren't in the same way, you know, a generation before. I'm seeing, you know, our crime rates in the Black community have been much lower than they were when I was coming up in the 80s and Reagan 80s. We've seen teen birth rates be at a 25-year low. I mean, I feel like a lot of times we say a lot about what the Black community isn't doing and don't celebrate what a lot of the Black community is doing. That doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of work to do, and the context that we're operating in doesn't have a lot of work to do. But we also have done a lot of work. But yeah, so that's, for me, that's what Black liberation looks like. It's when we all free together.
Thank you so much. So Baba Darrow, to expand on what Michael was saying, like, could you give us some examples of what divisiveness look like? Because in order for us to move forward in liberating ourselves, we kind of like got to learn how to be together. Now I get it. Everybody's not going to get along. Like, however.
No community does that.
How can we move together as a collective? Because I feel like we don't have to get along, but I think we can strategize how to move together. Like, that's just Marnese. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Well, my opinion comes from the point that that there's been a long war to try to separate Black people into different segments, into different groups, and there's also been the technology. And so when I grew up, the thing was everybody was out in the street. They was running into each other. They was going places. Now, most young people, they live on their phones, on the internet. They hang out with their friends on the phone. Most of them, in the old days, folks used to be wondering where their kids were come 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. Now, most of the young folks, you know where they're at. They're in their room. They're on the phone. They're on the internet. They're doing something. And so that's a different kind of engagement. And I think right now during the pandemic, where folks are stuck in the house, I think this has created a situation where a lot of folks haven't had to deal with each other or really engage with each other for a very long time. And I think that when Black people began to communicate more and actually get to know each other more, I think we'll be stronger as a people. Because now we are more divided and know less about each other than a whole lot of times in the past. Even though I will concede to the brother that, yeah, a whole lot of crime and other kinds of things have changed, but not really. I mean, you know, because when you begin to look at how we're still being played against each other and how then those crime rates, they're not really the same as they used to be, even though it might be the same kind of actions that created them. When I lived in Philadelphia, they did a thing one time, and they said they wanted to see what was the major cause of why Black people were shooting each other between the ages of 16 and 25. And so I thought it was going to be something like gang violence, drugs or something, because that's what the media tells us. But then again, when the results came back, they said it was because of relationships, people fighting over girlfriends and stuff like that. I thought that was really interesting because most people who are 30 years old can't even remember some of their girlfriends at the age of 16 or their boyfriends at the ages of 17 and 18 and stuff. So that's what I'm talking about. We need to be getting back to understanding that we are family and we're one people and we have some responsibilities to each other. Most Black people know more about white people than they know about each other because we have to survive them and navigate them to survive in this world and so-called succeed.
Yeah, Natasha, did you have
All right.
I did, because I work with young people quite a bit, and so I hear this this idea of like young people not being as engaged and on their phones. And I think for me, I try to remember that every generation tends to think that generations after them are taking us on some downward spiral. That has been the case since the beginning of time, right? When we think of even going back to the 60s, right? When bell bottoms and the hippies, and they just swore that this was the generation that was going to take us to, you know, hell in a handbasket. So I think I think each generation has its gifts and its challenges. And I also think that that's shaped by the environment. You know, I think about when newspapers came out and when phones came out, there was backlash against those things because they're like, people won't engage face to face anymore. They'll be reading the newspaper. They'll be on the phone, right? So every form of technology always brings kind of this resistance from the older generations. And for me, technology is neither good nor bad. It's a tool. And a tool to me only gets its power in terms of how you use it, right? So if I have a hammer, I can do a lot of good things with that hammer. I can build a house, I can do productive things, or I can use that hammer to kill somebody, right? It's not the tool that has the power. It's about who's wielding that tool and what intentions. And so when I think about technology and the internet or phones, yes, I'm also a parent. You know, there's some frustration sometimes when I can't get my kids off the phone. But at the same time, I've seen them do some incredible things. My kids are into tech way more than I am. I've seen them do some incredible things with technology. I feel like a lot of the things that we're seeing in terms of social movements wouldn't have happened without the internet, because the internet democratizes conversations. There are terms that we're using and techniques that we're using that for a long time were locked in the academy. They were locked in institutions. You only heard about those things if you went to college. Now I can get on the internet and hear a term like intersectionality. They used to only be in a college classroom class. You know what I'm saying? Now, if I want to organize something, I can easily get on the internet and talk to a person in Palestine who has a similar struggle, and we can organize. I used to have to print up flyers, and now I can. So I feel like technology is not the enemy. I don't even feel like people using it is. It's about using it in an engaged way. And I also think like it's really important for us to look at the data on young people, because yes, they have a lot of challenges, but people don't know that teen pregnancy is down. Right? Like young people are really making a lot of moves that people don't know because we are so used to seeing them one way or listening to a narrative when the numbers don't actually say that. And then, and if we look really closely at what they're doing things different than us. And those differences have some pros and some cons, but they're using technology in ways that, like I said, a lot of what we're seeing socially, a lot of this resistance and this uprising is because of organizing through the internet. and people using technology to make things happen. So I agree that yes, it can be an issue with engagement, and that's something that we have to work on. But at the same time, I think it's important to give them their props and to recognize technology as the powerful force that it is too.
I think this young generation is, the reason the narrative is set up that way is because my generation, I'm 45 years old. Me and Marnese went to undergrad together. Michael and I are the same age based on what he said. No, my generation did take our community to hell in a handbasket, if we're being real. No, I'm keeping it real. I mean, it was a reason I joined the Nation of Islam at 17 years old. Because I was gang banging in Southwest Detroit, and we were robbing people, drug dealers. And if you pull up the snitch tree from BMF, a third of them people I used to be in the streets with. They destroyed many Black communities. You know, we did that. So we have to hear more from y'all that work with young people in the streets, as I do, but most of the young people I interact with is at the university campuses, and get that better perspective, because we're operating on the narrative of what we did, to be quite honest with you. And there's no way around it. And we could look at the data and look at families, Black families, out of wedlock birth rates, incarceration rates compared to employment and higher education rates, all that, right? So when I was in college, it was true that it was more Black men in prison than in college. In 2020, it's not true. There are more Black men in college than in the penitentiary in 2020. So we need y'all who work with young people in the streets and y'all younger people to constantly and consistently remind us of that, because Baba Darrow, he's older than myself, so he saw what my generation did. We destroyed Detroit, if we want to be honest, but people don't want to be honest. We destroyed Detroit. My mama went to Finney High School before she dropped out and got married. When I had to live on the east side of Detroit, and my brother went to Denby and I went to Columbus Middle School, it was a middle-class Black community on the east side, Chalmers and Houston and Whittier. You go over there now, it's Beirut. Beirut after they just blew it up, Beirut, if we want to be honest. And we did that, and we juxtaposed that on y'all young people. So I just want to applaud y'all for pointing that out.
So
I'm 40, just by the way, so I'm old people too.
So I wanted to get everyone's thoughts on what are some 5 issues that Black people can really zero in on right now, that we can really focus on. If I were talking to my daughter, I would say, hey, focus on what you're passionate about. However, in the broader scheme of things, look, this is what we really need to be focusing on right now in your efforts. Could you provide or offer any issues that as a movement to move Black people forward? As we see, there's the Black Lives Matter movement. It has momentum right now. However, I kind of feel like we need to expand a little bit more and also provide tools or strategies that we will have to talk offline about how to sustain Black people in the future, right? Because I feel like social movements in the past, we're kind of reliving the same issues that happened in the past during the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power movements, all these other movements. And I don't want the Black Lives Matter movement or any future movement that, happens to, perpetuate or do the same thing that happened in the past. So what are 5 key issues that you think you could offer someone that's younger or even just getting into this movement? Because people how do I get involved? What should I do? What do you think? So
all right, well, I'm not shy.
I wanted to step back. I've been talking so much, so I don't know. Sister in the middle want to speak.
Aaliyah, did you?
All right, well, I'm a college professor, so I talk all day as a profession now. So
I'm an advocate, so I'm used to talking, so I'm trying to be not that guy right now.
So I'm just going to be real brief and just point out one thing, then I could double back after y'all express yourselves. 2 things I should say. The first thing is, we have to decolonize our mind. Like, we are taking that for granted, to be quite honest with you. You know, I mean, that was the whole purpose. I mean, we could take it all the way back to Martin Delaney, to Carter G. Woodson, to Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, to your frat brother Marnese, your frat brothers, Dr. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, right? It was focused on the mind, right? For the Black Power movement, the transition from Negro to Black. For the new Negro movement, the transition from nigger to Negro, right? That's important. Decolonizing our mind. What is it? What does it mean to be Black? Many people reject that now. What does it mean to be African American? Many young people are rejecting that now. They are falling prey to, I'm going to be real, con artists and frauds who are trying to manipulate them for their own personal gain. These Dane Callaways, we not from Africa crap, and et cetera, right? So it's a battle for our minds, whether we realize it or not. So we have to decolonize our mind and truly educate ourselves. And then lastly, economics. That's what Booker T tried to tell us. But we wanted to solely listen to Du Bois, like it was either or. Should have been both, right? And Du Bois done won. And the civil rights movement did what they did, but what did the civil rights movement neglect? Economics. What did the Black Power movement try to address, starting with the Nation of Islam? Economics, but they were destroyed by the government. So we're back to Black people need businesses, Black people need economic power. It's nothing new. We've been saying that since during slavery, Reconstruction, the Nadir period, and Jim Crow. So them are the two main things, I think, and that's what I see missing in the discourse. I see hashtag buy Black, but I'm not seeing enough Black producers. I mean, it's cool, but we all can't be the same thing. And what I mean is we all can't open a barbershop, a nail salon, hair salon. We all can't have a clothing line. We all can't be rappers with a record label. And that's, if you find any Black person, not any, far too many young Black people who say, I want to be an entrepreneur, they're going to do one of the above. And that's not going to employ many Black people. That's not going to sustain a community, right? We used to have in Detroit on the east side. I remember as a kid, I was born in 75. So I remember going back to 1982, right? Right there on French Road and Shoemaker Road, right? You know, we used to have Black convenience stores, Black gas stations, Black grocery stores, right? We used to have those. When 30 years, well, I'm 45, so 40 years ago, we used to have those and people employed, right? And we could have taken that next step and been producers, right? But we're not producers, and every business that we emphasize is service industry and cursory.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think for young people entering into the social justice movement, the highest aspiration, or anybody entering into the social justice movement, right? The highest aspiration of the work as somebody who leads one of the spaces is focusing on self-discovery. Like when you ask people what makes them happy, too many of our people don't have an answer for that. They don't have an answer for like what they're good at, what inspires them, what work is meaningful to your soul, right? The social justice movement requires a variety of different skill sets and people operating at so many different levels that there's an opportunity for people to experiment with media creation or public speaking or legislative writing, or like literally so many things, right? Event planning, like so many things. So like, you know, hopefully the movement is reciprocal and people leave with a sense of an empowered identity. I think that's super important. I think another thing, I'm saying the things that I don't think that people will emphasize. I think we need to talk about mental health. I think we need to talk about the fact that our people are in such justifiable but nonetheless destructive rage, right? We need to make it okay and accessible counselors. We need to make it okay for young men and boys to cry. Our, grown men, shit. Like, I'm sorry, can you cuss on the show? Everybody should be able to cry.
Be grown.
Everybody should be able to cry and express their emotions, right? And then, of course, justice, right? Like, the justice system is essentially a replacement for slavery at this point. Like, we're all clear on that, right? So it behooves us as a people to recognize that industry was created to replace the system that originally bonded us. So I feel like that is at the heart. Other people said poverty. We don't need to go into that. We got to focus on economics as a people. And finally, education. But I don't think that, like, when we talk about what Black liberation looks like, it does not look like giving our young minds to the colonizers.
Right.
Right? It does not look like our babies being trudged through what is essentially a Eurocentric socialization of the world.
Thank you.
I want to point out that, so how we've been so conditioned to get out to the suburbs because they had a better education, right? I'm guilty. But now, of course, I regret that. And have to reteach the kids, okay, about our history, right? Or go do some volunteerism in the classroom while they're watching me, right? To teach them about Black history, right? Can't go into the whole radicalism and stuff like that. But how would you even start, with decolonizing? I mean, of course, everything starts at home, but you got parents out here who may have mental health issues or experiencing trauma for just being in the house during this pandemic, right? Or there's food insecurity. It's like, there's so many issues that we're trying to handle, and I think Black history get put on the back burner. So how do we navigate or just balance out all of this?
Yeah, I think, this is why I do policy work, right? Because I think large-scale change requires changing structures and systems. And the truth is, our educational system has been gutted and inappropriate for a very long time. And COVID is, making it very, very clear children are going back to school so that people can work, so that our economy doesn't shut down, right? And then that, I think, is shining a light on. Okay, thank you, sir. And that is.
No, this one needs charge.
Thank you. I will charge the phone. Here, why don't you go put it on the charger in my room? I'm sorry, he's 4. He interrupts all the Zoom calls. So, I think it starts with policy change on an individual level. I don't know how to tell people to do it. I don't, honestly. My mom, I'm blessed to have Afrocentric parents. I'm the child of 2 Black Panthers, and my mom has a PhD, a background in educational counseling, and she teaches my children. Super blessed for that, right? Like, that's unheard of. It's literally like, I won't complain about anything, but most people don't have access to that. I was definitely in fear of having to choose between a quality education and an appropriate socialization for my children, right? Like, don't come back to the hood and feel like you are better than our cousins, right? Pookie and Ray Way. I did not want my children learning that.
Thank you.
Can I follow up with you on your question, Marnese?
Yeah, Yes, please.
So I disagree a little bit with the professor, and I definitely agree with a lot of what the sister said. I think one of the things we've got to do is look, like, so the brother brought up the fact that we've been here before. And I would say to you, Marnese, I don't believe every movement has a natural life cycle globally. I mean, every social movement has a lifespan, and you try to get as much in within that lifespan as you can, because just of the way human nature is made up, right? Like after a certain point, we want to do something else. And Black culture, especially, because we're improvisers. So we really get bored faster, and we really want to go on to something else faster, I think, than even other people. That said, when I think about like Generation X, I also think, I heard what he said about Detroit, but I grew up, I was a teenager in Chicago, and I was a teenager and a young adult in DC. And you saw very different contexts and very different things for Gen Xers in those communities at that time. And I think one of the things is that we got the message as the post-civil rights generation: go to school, get a good job, right? Not go start a business, go get a good corporate job or a good government job or a good, and I have a master's degree. I went and did the things you're supposed to do. I did them a little later in life because I was working in the nonprofit field for a long time, and you could advance for it back in the 90s in the nonprofit field without a degree for a long time until you couldn't, especially as a Black person. So I think that, when we think about what are the things we want people to do, I think we want them to learn from the mistakes of the previous generations, because there isn't a whole lot new under the sun, but there are new lessons that every generation has experienced. Like, we wouldn't have known that the civil rights movement wasn't enough until they did what they did. Right? Like, because we have these ideas about, if we just get these rights on the books, if we just move to these neighborhoods, if we just get to this certain school, if we just get access. And then we found out, no, that's not enough. Then it was like, if we're just respectable enough, if we talk a certain way, if we walk a certain way, if we dress a certain way, now we know that that's not enough. Right? So I think that we have to make sure that this generation is learning the lessons of the past, and also learning the context that destroyed every time Black folks tried to do the things that we say. We have started businesses before and had them snatched, right? So like I have a book here called Collective Courage. It's not mine. It's a history of African-American cooperative economic thought and practice by Jessica Gordon Newbark. She can tell you about areas in which we had cooperative economics in the Black community, and it worked until it was destroyed. I See Black People, The Rise and Fall of African-American on Television and Radio by Christelle Zook, which talked about the fact that we did own hundreds of theaters, independent radio stations, and public access television stations, and they were taken from us systematically over several decades. So this idea that, and those of us who are old enough to remember when you had the symbol on the back of your hairspray and your hair grease and all of that to let you know that that was a Black-owned hair or beauty product business, we had those things, right? And those things got taken. So I think one of the things that we have to learn as a people moving forward is, yes, economics, but an economics that is resistant to automation, right? Because a lot of jobs are about to be automated out, including white-collar jobs. So for instance, I work for myself as a nonprofit consultant. I write grants. Computer ain't gonna write no grant. I make a middle-class income writing grants and helping nonprofit organizations that work with our people do better, get the things that they need. So I tell young people, get a skill, master something, get certified in something. If that's tech, if that's plumbing, if that's electricity, I think we devalued vocational skills. And vocational skills, the starting salary for a plumber is something like 6 figures, like $106,000.
Absolutely.
So my uncle is a sheet metal worker. He raised 4 kids as a sheet metal worker working for the union. So it's that kind of thing I think we have to encourage, and also encourage freedom. I belong to a lot of Black expat groups. A lot of Black people are leaving this country. Is a movement afoot to get out. They took Jordan Peele's message and they said, we are out. I'm personally planning on leaving next year. So I think that but raising children who's not just thinking about the world in terms of where they live, but thinking globally. Where else can your skill set be used? Where can you be maximized? How can you have a better life regardless of where you are?
All right. So Baba Darrell, and then
Yes.
thoughts on like issues where people can focus on. Any follow-up comments to the comments that we heard?
Yeah, I agree with everything almost everybody said. I agree that our young people today are geniuses, but I'm talking about we don't relate the same way. And we dealing with a lot of the same issues that we were dealing with when I was growing up. You know, police shoot down our folks. And I graduated from high school in 1972. I moved to Detroit in 1978 and was trained and started my career as an organizer here in Detroit. Detroit was already at war, and folks had pretty much emptied the east side. The stores over there were selling messed up food. And so that was my job. Was we organized a group of teenagers and we put them to work going door to door over there just to let people know what was going on with the grocery stores and other kinds of shit. We still dealing with those same kinds of issues. There's a war on black people, and this stuff been going on for 400 years. So every generation we dealing with some of the same issues. I'm just saying that policy is not going to change this. We need to change the whole system, how we think, and all this other kind of stuff. This is absolutely ridiculous. Now, we live in an anti-black world. And the reason we live in an anti-black world, because of what white supremacy and what white people have done to our folks, they scared shitless of what's going to happen when black people come together. That's why they play us all against each other. And that's why right now we got to get back to the old days where if you was a rich black person or a dirt poor homeless black person, you still knew who your family was and you still knew where home was in the community and you acted like that. But now we in a whole different space, you know? Moving out of the country is not new. Our folks been doing that since the 30s and stuff. Because we need people on the outside to help get the resources to do the fight here. But we need to change the system here. And I'm not just talking about getting rid of capitalism and going into socialism. Because even if we go to a socialist system, we still gonna have to get rid of white supremacy and racism, or we gonna still be dealing with the same shit. And you know, and I can tell you about policy. Cuba outlawed racism in 1960, but they still struggling with folks whose heart and mind ain't really there, even though Cuba got a whole lot of stuff on the US in terms of healthcare and other kinds of stuff. So I think we got to learn that we're a family and that we're African people and that understand what has happened to us over the centuries and understand that we need to come together and stop this shit, or we're gonna keep on doing the same shit over and over and over again. In 1972, I bought an album by War, and they had a song on there called Get Down. And on that song, go Google it and find it. They singing about the police shooting our ass down in the street. And now this is 2020? And goddamn it, we still got folks coming up with songs about shooting us down in the street because ain't nothing changed. So it's time for us to bring our ass together and stop some shit and make some shit happen. And when we do that, then the economics, the emotional, all that kind of stuff, it's gonna have to come together because we're gonna have to work with each other. All right, y'all, peace.
The students.
Can I add
Okay.
just a second?
And then we'll go to Ilea.
I just want to add to the question. I feel like a lot of people said a lot of things that I really agree with. I think when you talked about decolonizing our minds, I think that's so important. I think there's so many ways that we view ourselves the way our oppressors view us, right? We have internalized oppression, right? So we will hear us talk about us all the time in some of the most derogatory ways, and we are so fixated on our own pathology. And what I mean by that is this idea of we look at ourselves and what we want to see is like, we need to do this better, and we need to, and we do. There are so many things that we need to do, but so much of that conversation for me is informed by this idea that we've internalized this idea of who we are that's based on how our oppressors see us, which is always, they like to push this message of us, something being wrong with us, right? There's always something wrong with us. And when I first started working with the organization I worked with, Raise It Up, one of the first questions that we would ask young people is, what's wrong with our community? Like, what's wrong? You know, what's the issue? And a lot of them would be like, well, you know how we are, right? Our community is like this because, you know, but it was all these messages about like something is wrong with me. Something is wrong with me. Something is wrong with where I come from. And that's the root of all our problems. And for us, it was about them understanding that the things that we see in our community is not a result of us just being, something's just wrong with us as a people and we're just pathological and deviant. It's because policies have been put in place. Our neighborhoods look the way they look because of redlining. They look the way they look because of like housing laws, white flight, right? And so this idea of, you know, I'm really resistant to these messages about something just being wrong with us, right? We do have our issues and our challenges, but all of those issues and challenges are rooted in white supremacy. They're rooted in like systematic stuff. So any of this individual kind of stuff we need to work on, it is like about policy, and it is about these things that have set up these conditions in our lives and in our neighborhoods that we need to address. It's not that something's just wrong with us. So I think that's a part of decolonizing our mind too, is getting rid of that internalized oppression that starts us at this deficit just by who we are anyway. I think like that the work that we do has to be internal and external. So we talked about mental health earlier, which I think is like important, but it's about like, again, challenging our assumptions about who we are and how we look at other Black folks, as well as external. Like we have to also be in the streets doing stuff and doing action and policy, but that work around our mental health and our internalized oppression is really important. I think understanding that in terms of systematic change, like there's not one thing that's going to get us there, that the way a system works is it has all different parts. And I feel like sometimes we get caught up in this idea of like, because my role might be a teacher and your role might be an artist and your role might be a policymaker, that we start arguing about this idea of like, we need to do it this way. And the system needs all of those parts, right? So your work is in the classroom, your work is writing grants, your work is around policy, your work, you know, and appreciating all of those different pieces and understanding that the professor is not supposed to be the artist all the time, and the mental health worker is not going to be the grant writer, and that's okay. That's beautiful. That's how we're going to affect this change in all these different sectors. And then the last thing I would say is, I feel like we need to have a lot of grace with each other. I feel like we are so quick to cancel each other over disagreements. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for canceling people that need to be canceled. Like I'm like, R. Kelly, let's cancel him, right? Like, cause you know, this is a danger to our culture. This is a danger to our girls. Like some people we just got to be like, we're not doing this with you. But I feel like, especially within our community with Black people, we got to give each other a lot of grace and understand we're not going to always agree. We're not going to always have the same strategies or tactics, but if we are really understanding like we all want the same thing, which is like liberation for our people, we want a better quality of life, then we got to give each other room to mess up. We got to give each other room for, like, we need teachable moments. I've had so many teachable moments in my life where people who loved me enough and weren't willing to throw me away after my mistakes and gave me a lot of grace, you know, allowed me to stay, allowed me to stay in movements or organizations or wherever I wanted to be, because they knew my heart, they knew I had good intentions. So I think for us, just really being careful about like canceling people right off the bat, and like, and understanding like we need a lot of grace, and you know, if we have the same intentions, let's work towards that and work through some of those differences.
Thank you, Arlea. All right.
Yeah, I think there's an important distinction, just to add on briefly and correct something that I said earlier. I know we need to work on poverty and economics, but not from an individualistic mind frame. And so when working on poverty and economics, we need to ensure that we're not building classism into the structures of our movement.
Right.
But that has been the thing that allows some of us to feel like they're better than others of us. And that in and of itself is a tearing apart. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. So when I'm thinking about social movements, because a lot of people want to get involved or looking for Black leaders like Malcolm, the Panthers, Dr. Martin Luther King, or even like organizations. We have the NAACP, we have Black Lives Matter, we have this new one, Color Change, Nation of Islam, right? And people like ask, hey, who should I get involved with? does this still make sense, right? Does having organizations with these different ideologies, platforms, objectives, who may be pushed by the, the nonprofit industrial complex, or who are funded by white supremacists, like, does this make sense for liberating our Black people, like, to be a part of these organizations who been around for years, but like Baba Dara said, we still have these same issues, right? So is this really still working for us?
Can I speak on that?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's different. I mean, one of the reasons why Black Lives Matter is a leaderless movement is because of the lessons that they learned from having the charismatic leader model, right? They just kill the charismatic leader, and then the people don't have nobody to follow them, and they go back to what was, right? And so I think that they have learned some of the lessons. One of the things about, even in terms of the resources or the funding that some of these Black Lives Matter organizations are receiving, some of those organizations are turning down that money. Color of Change does not receive any corporate dollars on purpose, intentionally. And so I think that, where I do agree with the brother who brought up, Gen X's failures, I'm part of a 90s advocate, activist, on the ground movement work brother who was doing the work in DC, and we played it nice. Like, we did the policies, we did the white papers, we did the fact sheets, we did the very, kind of very respectable, we had our little marches and stuff like that. And it might have carried the ball forward, but we didn't see the kind of seismic, significant pushes that I'm seeing from this Black Lives Matter movement. And I mean, and the other thing, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, it's global. Like, this is the largest global movement. The civil rights movement was not global, right? The women's movement was not global. Black Lives Matter is actually global. And that's significant. Now, in terms of, whether or not the arguments are different or the solutions are gonna yield the type of results, I think we'll have to see. I just watched Uptight, a 1968 film by Ruby Dee and Jules Dassin, and I promise you, they were having the exact same conversation in 1968 that some of the Black Lives Matter people are having right now. And so, to the point, there is like a frustration, like, is this more of the same? I think you're going to see some significant change. It won't be enough. It won't do the job. And I think that we can't depend on any one social movement to do all of the job. As the sister pointed out, it's systemic. We have to be in all of the parts, doing all of the things. Not one thing ain't gonna fix it all. It just ain't.
So one thing is not gonna fix it all. We all have different areas, right, that we focus on. Baba Dara is doing environmental justice. Sister Quinn is working around with children. So is Natasha, you're a professor. It's like we all know, and you're in the LGBTQIA community. It's kind of like, how can we all come together? Like, why is this so hard? And I didn't even touch on Brother Kanji was part of the Nation Song, right? So it's like, I feel like these different areas are really dividing us, and especially with the LGBTQIA community. I got a text message was like, why we have to bring their issues into Black liberation? I'm like, well, wait a minute, aren't they Black? I mean, so I'm just
goodness all day. Family pictures behind me, all Black people, all day.
How are we gonna keep separating ourselves? And so my question is like, how can we move this conversation forward? Because to Baba Dara's point, that's the divisive piece. Like, we're in our different silos, and we kind of need to put some things aside, okay, and move together and lift up intersectionality.
We have to discard some sacred cows. That's the first step towards that. And what do I mean by that? It's the false dichotomy created by respectable Negroes and by white progressives, white racist liberals at the turn of the century, the 1920s, 1930s, that created this false dichotomy of either or when we needed both. Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois are a stark example of that. Booker T focused solely on economics. In 1906, they burned down the quintessential Washingtonian city, Atlanta, right? W.E.B. Du Bois didn't focus on economics. The NAACP was reliant on white, racist, progressive philanthropy, and they, in many ways, controlled the movement. As a result, and then we factor in respectability politics, right? And unfortunately, Marnese, all our skin folk ain't our kinfolk.
Mhm.
I mean, Detroit is a great example. People don't want to talk. We talk about white flight. We don't want to talk about that brown bourgeoisie flight out of Detroit that left those who couldn't leave there, because their whole goal for that segment of the civil rights movement was to be able to lead the poor niggas in the ghetto.
But then that's
They
the
like,
point about internalized, oppression that we have with ourselves.
well, but see, we can't necessarily just attribute it to that, because if we look at history, there's a long line. If we look at the black politicians during Reconstruction, Eric Foner has a directory of it. It's called Freedom's Lawmakers, and they have a biography and pictures for those that they can get of every black elected official during Reconstruction. The vast majority of them were the children of slave masters who were given land by their fathers, who were given educations at Ivy League schools. So there's a lot of myths about Black history and about American history that isn't actually accurate, right? I mean, it's not by happenstance, and they make them look like outliers, that Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois graduated with PhDs from Harvard. No, that was par for the course for that lineage, that blue vein society mentality, that Howard University acculturation and culture, right? If we're going to get real, and I use Howard University at the time as a microcosm, because if we study the history of that, right? And what Black Lives Matter movement, if we call it a movement, is doing is actually they're returning to what had been laid down. They're rediscovering, because I'm telling you, if we look at it, my generation stepped away from it. I mean, it's point blank, period. We turned away from it. The New Negro movement was an international movement. That's what gave us the ANC. That's what gave us the UNIA. It was a global movement. That's what gave us negritude in Francophone Africa. That gave us people like Frantz Fanon. After Shangor and Amar Cesar and all them, right? The Black Power movement was a global movement. Black consciousness in South Africa was part of the Black Power movement. And lastly, on the gay tip, I don't understand what is wrong, because these people, I'm just gonna go all the way there because that's what I do. I mean, like, I use an example of when I give speeches to the NPAC chapters wherever I'm at, and then they'll get on the homophobe tip. But I'm like, bro, you got gay people on your flyer that you trying to recruit to be Qs. You got gay people on your flyer you trying to recruit to be Zetas. You got gay people on your flyer you trying to recruit to be Alphas. Some of the leading Black revolutionaries were homosexual, but we don't know history. You know what I'm saying? In fact, Mama Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother, and I just moved from the community she was born and raised in half of Lumberton, North Carolina, and Robeson County are her cousins. Benjamin Crump, she grew up with him. Y'all may not know that, right? In Robeson County, Lumberton, North Carolina. She wrote the platform for the Black gay liberation movement. She met with them in Detroit, Michigan, and in New York. She wrote it. And then who adopted it? Dr. Huey P. Newton, and issued statements for the Black Panther Party for self-defense, right? Bayard Rustin, right? A homosexual, right?
Oh, you just went out. You just cut out.
Okay, well, I said enough. I proved my, I stated my point enough.
All right, so we're gonna go to Natasha, and then and yeah.
So
Yeah,
I'm so glad you lifted that up, because I do think it's important to recognize that when people talk about us focusing on LGBTQ issues, they try to act like, well, why do they want to be part of the movement? First of all, LGBTQ people are part, like Black people, like being Black doesn't mean that you don't have some kind of, you know, orientation or like, right? So Black gay people exist first. And it's just kind of absurd that like a lot of people don't think about that. But I also think it's very important to recognize that they've always been a part of the movement, whether those movements recognize their contributions or not. We think about like Bayard Rustin, who was so instrumental in the movement, right? But nobody knows who he is because he was gay, and so much of his contribution was played down or either attributed to other people, right? But he was like, I mean, just as instrumental as these names that we hear, MLK and Rosa Parks, and right. And so I think it's important to recognize that history, that LGBTQ folks have always been in the movement, always been pushing it, and have done it without the credit or the recognition for what they've done. And I think it's also important for us to understand that because, like I said, I work with young people, so I see young people who are exiled from their communities, put out of their homes for being who they are. And I really commend Black Lives Matters movement. And I think that the reason why it's like that is because it was started by Black women. It started by queer Black women, right? Being a movement that's for everybody. One of those few movements, because as great as the civil rights movements were, the Black Power movements, and even the women's rights movements, like as great as those movements were, they were not inclusive, right? Like we think about the women's movement and how it excluded Black women, how it excluded queer women. We think about the Black Power movement and how patriarchal it was, and sexist and misogynist and homophobic. So I agree that like BLM is something that's built upon those things, but it's something completely different in the inclusivity of it, the reach of it. And I think there's a lot of things that go into that. And then the last thing I'll say is, you know, when we talk about LGBTQ folks, for me, I think it's really important for me for people to understand, because like I said, I work with youth. There was a study done by the University of Texas that showed that simply by using a young person's proper pronoun, and what I mean by proper pronoun is the pronoun that they know themselves to be and they ask us to use, it reduces their risk of suicide. It reduces suicide ideation by a young person coming to me and simply telling me I go by he, him pronouns, right? And I might be looking at that person, and based on their appearance or what I want them to be, I'm like, you're a she. Right? Like, you're a she. You ain't gonna tell me you're a he. All I gotta do is say, I hear you. I hear you. You're a he. I'm gonna start calling you he. And that takes that young person from being at risk of suicide to potentially saving their lives. So when we're talking about the work that we do with LGBTQ communities, when we talk about young people, people want to be, I think part of our movements have to include love. It has to include inclusivity. And that means seeing people. Recognizing people's identities, whether we have been familiar with those identities or not, whether our own conditioning, like, right. And but yeah, I feel like we're divided so much in part because we're not ready to overcome some of our own privileges within our community and our own internalized oppression and things that white folks have taught us about ourselves and how to deal with each other. So
Alea, and then I have a 2 questions, and we're gonna just go ahead and wrap up for tonight. But Alea.
So I feel like, going back to the original question, I feel like it's really, really important to understand that there will be no one container for our people, period. Right? We all express and move and vibrate, and we gravitate to different things, right? The best thing we can hope for, and this is where real, true, gritty organizing kicks in. Like, if we're doing real organizing work, then we're paying attention to leaders that exist naturally within community, and we're politically educating those leaders to take natural leadership of their people, the people who already are gravitating towards them. And then we are conferring with each other about how we align on important issues. but it's not actually. I think it's a mischaracterization to suggest that we are divided, because no one container will fit any people, right? Like there are all of these stereotypes about what Black people are, and many of these stereotypes are negative, and one of them are about division, as if there is some utopian unity in any that exists in any other culture. It does not. Now they might not, there might be systems in place to negate outliers, right? But no people is fully aligned. So the question is, how do we work with the natural leadership that exists within our communities? And I think that's why the coalition model is so very vital to creating a sustainable movement, right? Like the coalition that Force Detroit convenes is made up of a number of different organizations, and all of them have different flavors, different perspectives, different an entirely different culture, and we come together to think about policy that matters to our people, and then we go back to our corners, right? We might not go for a drink after.
Yeah, and I guess also just to piggyback really quickly, in those communities were also made and shaped by policy too, right? Like there's a reason why there's a Chinatown. There's a reason why the Jews are organized in the way that they are, and it's not just about cultural, innate, inherent values. Some of that is there, true, but there's also like this country wouldn't allow them to do but so much within a certain context, and they maximize that opportunity. And so did we in segregation. So did we, right? So, yeah, I mean, I get really passionate when people tell me what Black people don't do. I get very upset. We lead the nation in anti-violence program. We lead the nation in fatherhood initiatives. We lead the nation in working with our kids. Black fathers work with their sons and daughters more than any other men in this country. That's fact. The CDC fact, right? Like, and so when we, we could be doing better, but we're not doing terrible. We could be doing better, but we're not doing terrible. And I want to appreciate the room for saying things I didn't have to say as the gay man in the room, that y'all stood up for our contributions in the community. I normally have to do that spiel. I used to talk about, Audre Lorde and James Baldwin and the Harlem Renaissance, and how you don't have that without queer people. Thank you for me not having to do that.
Can I add too? I want to think about time too, right? So the civil rights movement was in the 60s. That's 50 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Chattel slavery lasted 400 years. So I think in the 50 years, we have so much work to do, but I'm of the belief that we have to think about this in context. We have not been free, using that term loosely, right? We have not been free for a long time. And the amount of time that we were enslaved, the part of, all of that is a much longer time, and much longer, right? 400 years and 50 years. So I'm of the belief that, yes, we had a lot of work, but I think in that time we've done a lot.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, Alea, about the whole container, and I appreciate that. I really do.
And I want to say, I'm just piggybacking on the sister. Anybody out there that's watching that's a young activist, read Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton's Black Power. He has a whole chapter on coalition politics, and that use that approach, because one of the things that the respectable Negroes are saying is that Black Lives Matter. I don't support them because they're being hijacked by Antifa. They're being hijacked by right-wing agent provocateurs, right? It may or may not be true, but the point being, we can alleviate our concern of that by doing what the sister said, and people can just read that chapter in that book, and Stokely lays it out real clear, right? Now we're talking about, that goes back to intersectionality, critical race theory, right? Material determinism or interest convergence, right? We need to use that in our community. I'm going to keep it real. I am not a far left. I am a non-Marxist structural analysis. I'm not a Marxist. Marxism, I don't think applies to Black people. That's just my feeling of it, right? So I'm not all the way over there. However, with interest convergence, me understanding that, policy, we can come together on policy. We have policy interests in common, right? Even if me being a heterosexual cis Black male, the welcoming and protection of LGBTQI Black people, Africana people, is essential to advancement of my family, my community, right? You know, so it's that intersection. And I just wanted to add that, brother, I agree with you that we had those Black Wall Streets, Black business centers, and much of it was taken away. But we can't just leave it there like that, in my opinion, because it just perpetuates victimhood. Because what did Black people do to contribute to that? And that's tied to that Black flight. And that's what Baba Darrell was talking about. That's what I was talking about, where those businesses are gone on the east side. And before they were gone, they were taken over by Chaldeans. Black people sold them to the Chaldeans because they was like, oh, I'm just gonna move to the suburbs, drugs. I'm getting robbed by the Jays. That's what they used to call the heroin addicts, the Jays. I'm getting robbed by the Jays, right? I mean, I know my uncle used to own the bar, Francel's, Warren and Connors.
Yeah. Oh.
My uncle Chuck and my cousin Jimmy, and then they opened Francel's too in Southfield because the mob and Black people was robbing them so much. And my uncle was an air traffic controller at Coleman A. Young Municipal Airport. That's why they had the bar right across the street, because unfortunately air traffic controllers are alcoholics.
All right. Well, thank you, Brother Walton. I have to do my shout out in the chat for my viewers. Thanks everybody for tuning into the Marnese Live Talk Show. Thank you, Michael. I had a comment though from Michael. He says Dr. W.E. Du Bois also advocated co-economics. He was also a Pan-Africanist. He and Du Bois were both dealing with white supremacy and racism, but there were realities were different. And then also, Brother David, could you provide documentation of when Sister Afeni Shakur wrote the white paper? Could you provide documentation?
Yeah, I'll have to. I won't have time to put it in this chat, but I'll get it to you and you can share it with your viewers next time. Because it's on my other computer that I'm writing my book on, and that's where I came across those primary source documents. So I can get that to you.
Thank you. So before we wrap up, I was in a conversation about reparations, and I just walked away because I felt some type of way about it. And so this person said that Black people need white people to help us like liberate from the white supremacy culture. Like we need them, white people, to liberate us from white supremacy culture. What are your thoughts on that?
They want integration.
Black liberation.
They want integration. That's what it boils down to. I mean, I'm saying, and that is one of my concerns about how Black Lives Matter is being presented on TV. It's that moral crusade that the civil rights. And that's why Stokely and Mama Fannie Lou Hamer said this is the end of the moral crusade of trying to change the hearts and minds of white people. We're pivoting and we're focusing on Black people, changing the minds of Black people. And the way Black Lives Matter is being presented on TV is that it's not the moral crusade, but it's the bully crusade, where we're going to intimidate white people into accepting us. So it's that notion. And I'm not saying that's what the movement is. That's how it's being portrayed, because it's that narrative that, right, that's what the respectable Negroes, that's what they went back to the civil rights movement of, no, we need white people. So if we're focusing on them welcoming us as their neighbor, then yeah, you need white people. Because we're going to be 2 Black families in a community of 30 homes of white people. So we do need white people. So when the police harass me to come outside and protect my kids, right? But see, that's not liberation. That's integration. So we don't need white people to do nothing but get out the way. White supremacist white people ain't even our major issue in my opinion. It's the liberal white people in the way, wanting to lead, wanting to tell us we got to get there. It got to be accepted by them to be legitimized.
Gary, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. We don't need white people. We need black people to get to know each other, to love each other, to respect each other. We don't have to think alike, like each other, or even believe in the same thing. But we just need to understand that we the same family. Unless we come together and get it together, we're not gonna never be free. And white people gonna always get in the way because all white people are racist. Some people are consciously anti-racist, but they all racist. And all men are sexist. Some are consciously trying to be anti-sexist, and we got to understand that. And so that's my point of view. Don't nobody have to agree, but I think all white people are racist, just like I think all men are sexist. And unless they work on their sexism, they just keep on doing the same shit. And that's the same thing that white people do. That's why in 2020, we still dealing with the same murders of black men in the street by police that we were dealing with in 1972. And unless black people come together and say, shit, this ain't happening no more, we're going to keep on dealing with this same shit. Rise up, fuck this shit.
I think Natasha want to go next, but I want to go after Natasha.
I was just going to say, I recently saw a meme and I reposted it, and it said white supremacy will end when white people see it as an issue they see it as a white issue to solve instead of as a black issue to empathize with. And I think that that's what maybe that person you were talking to is speaking to, this idea of like white supremacy is a white issue. It's not a black issue. And it won't end until white people are ready to address that. But I think the issue for us is, do we have to wait around for them? Do we have to wait for the end of white supremacy for us to focus on black liberation? And for me, that answer is no, right? Because I do agree that white supremacy won't end until white people are ready for it to end. But I don't think that has to stop us, right? That we just say, okay, right, then how do we do this? How do we shift our focus from ending white supremacy, which I don't think that we can do, to black liberation? Those two are not the same thing. And yes, they're related, and we have to be creative about how we strategize about that. But I think that's the thing. We don't have to wait on the end of white supremacy to do what we have to do for ourselves and focus on our liberation.
Thank you.
I think the co-signer what Natasha said, Bell Hooks said, are you interested in being a white man and all that comes with that, right? Like, are you interested in his capitalism, his neurosis, his psychosis, his issues? And James Baldwin also tried to warn black people, like, is it, like, are you trying to be white? Like, is that what you want? Do you want all of the privileges because all the privileges come with somebody being on their knees, somebody's foot on somebody's neck? Or do you want to be liberated and free? And I think that that's a different issue than whether or not we want white people to stop killing us. Chris Rock made a joke a while ago about the fact this really, the passage of time in civil rights is about how less awful white people can be, right? Like we've gone from mobs and lynching, and now we coming back to mobs and lynching. But to microaggressions and structural racism and covert racism. So I think that white people are always going to do what white people are going to do. We need to be focused on ourselves. We need to be focused on our own liberation. And we still need a parallel fight that has white people to get out the way, to stop killing us, to stop allowing the state to kill us, to stop undermining our environment so that we're getting cancer at higher rates, to stop doing those things. Like, white people still got to stop doing that stuff. And yeah, that is a little bit about their decision to not continuing to be awful. But we don't have to stop doing our work with each other to address our post-traumatic slave issues and our epigenetic issues that we have as a people.
Thank you. All right, Sister Quinn.
Yeah, anything that a person gives you, they can take away from you. Point blank, period. Liberation is not on the table, but allyship, support, friendship, the creation of communities, co-creating, organizing communities, all of that stuff is welcome and necessary, if you give me my liberation, then that means it was yours to hand to me, and that is not okay.
All right, so I'd like to thank you all for coming on to the Marnese Live Talk Show. If we can give a round of something that we can offer our Black brothers and sisters of what does a Black utopia look like? I am a Black futuristic, so I always think about 20 years or 40 years from now when my kids are grown, and I'm like, oh gosh, what is this world gonna look like? And of course, I see Black people in the future. So what can we offer our Black brothers and sisters for hope of liberating ourselves from internalized oppression, white supremacy culture, even the stuff that we do to each other? Like, what can we offer Black folks, like, that they will resonate with? I mean, we already kind of all agreed on that we have to definitely revisit economics and mental health and just really building relationships with each other. So can we offer one last thing for our viewers? And I'd like to see you all again on the Marnese Live Talk Show. So who would like to go first? David, would you like to go?
I'll go first. I don't have nothing really profound to say. One thing, I'm very pragmatic.
Okay.
So that we are here, right? We're dying from so many things and so many levels that are all related to structures, right? Even Black on Black violence is a result of structures, because those are violence of proximity. You know what I'm saying? So even relationship violence, those are violence of proximity, that we're still here, right? Because we've been I remember growing up, Black males, I'm an endangered species. We're going to be dead by 2020. It will be no more Black men. Like, so that we're just still here. Something as basic as that for me, you know, as a father of a Black son.
Thank you. All right, Sister Natasha?
Was the question, what does a Black utopia look like? Was that the question, or just something to leave folks with?
Leave around, what does that look like that we can offer people? Because right now it's really hard. People are really struggling. We've seen a lot of traumatic stuff on TV. Black people are getting shot. People are still, dying from COVID. Like, and then we're dealing with white supremacy culture on every level, right? So what could you offer?
I think, to echo David, I think the fact that we're here, that we're getting up every day and continuing this is something to celebrate, even when it doesn't feel like it. Again, I like to think about this in the context of our full struggle. And I do think that for me, it doesn't feel productive to focus on this narrative of like pathology or something being wrong with Black people. I reject that. I reject it, whether it's coming from white people or whether it's coming from our own people, because I think that Black people are some of the most beautiful, brilliant, resilient people in this world, right? So these ideas of something being innately wrong with us, I think that we have to reject that in order to even continue. And I think whether the dominant culture wants to celebrate our successes or educate us on them, that's our job. Our job is to look for the best in us, to recognize the best in us, and to know it's not going to come, like Alea said, it's not going to come because they put it on the table, right? They're not going to give us the best of us, right? They're not going to serve that in our education books. They're not going to, because it doesn't serve the agenda of white supremacy for Black people to feel good about ourselves and all the things that we've accomplished in such a short amount of time. So I think like that's important, that we recognize our beauty, that we recognize our resilience, that we know that we've accomplished so much in a short amount of time, and that we'll continue to do that if we're willing to recognize that we've already been doing it for hundreds of years. So,
all right, I'm gonna go to Sister Alea Quinn, birthday lady.
So I think the suggestions that folks have already said are powerful and beautiful. My add-on is I think we need to experiment with happiness and joy and hope, and find the things in life, the hobbies, the outlets, find the things in life that that make you feel passionate, hopeful, loving, all these things, and do them. Do them with your spare time, build a career in them, do them. Because, you know, the mental health of all of the communities around us depends on us being able to be centered and healthy.
Thank you. All right, Brother Michael.
I want to first echo Natasha's call for grace. I think we all need to have greater empathy, greater grace for one another. I am somebody who believes in canceling people who are chronically harmful to our communities, but make sure that those, you know, it's a matter of people not being able to be restored and redeemed through process and atonement and work. I don't believe in people not doing the work, whether it's on themselves or to stop being harmful to other people within the community. And no one is immune to being harmful to the community, even good Black folk, even activist Black folk. So there's that. I've lived in 6 cities. In every city, I've built community. Community doesn't have to be 100 people. It doesn't have to be these huge, giant concepts and magic, huge systems. I think people get very intimidated by those ideas. Community can be, I'm gonna make sure that I connect 5 to 10 folk and maybe and work with them. And maybe those 5 to 10 folk start building the community out there. And before you know it, you have a movement that you started of people just taking care of each other. I think some people have like called for more of the Black church because the Black church did that as part of its structure. I say you don't need the Black church to do that in order to do it. Just the building of the tools to build community are available to anyone to learn how to do that work and create space for one another, create sanctuary for one another. Because I promise you, people are lonely. I promise you, people are hungry. I promise you, they want to connect with each other on a regular basis in a safe way. They want to trust it. So create that wherever you are for our people, and you'll be doing the work.
Thank you. All right, Baba Darrell, bring us home. You're on mute.
Taking mute.
Okay, I think that we have to understand that we are one community, and we got to learn how to love and respect each other. We can disagree and not get along, but we got to love each other and fight together to make some real change. And I'm talking about the whole community. Love everybody that's in it. Everybody gets to be themselves. But unless we understand that we all one people, we're going to keep on letting folks play us against each other, and we ain't going to get nowhere. So we got to come together. We got to all do something. Everybody can do something. Anything you can do to help us get liberated and to be free, everybody got to do something. Nobody can sit on their ass. Everybody has to rise up. All right. Thank you, Marnese.
So I want to say thank you to everybody for coming on to the Marnese Live Talk Show. And I appreciate everyone for coming on. And so I'm going to say bye to everybody, and I'll see you guys again. And you guys be safe, wear your mask, and I love you.
Bye-bye. I love you too.
All right, so coming up on the Marnese Live Talk Show next week, we will take a break next week because it is Leo season, and I will be celebrating my daughter, London Christine Jackson. She will be turning 12 years old, and we will not air next week. However, coming up on the Marnese Live Talk Show the week after, we will continue our Black August Liberation series, as we will continue this conversation on Black liberation and talk about woke politics in our Black community. So I would like to thank Michael, Natasha. Sorry, Carrie, you didn't come in tonight, but we would like to have you back on the show. Baba Darrell, Sister Alea, and Brother Kalanji David Martin. All right. So thank you all for coming on to the Marnese Live Talk Show, and have a wonderful night.